It is Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. I am Justin Gary interviewing Ginny Kilgore. In the room with us is Ryan Parrish, Dylan McCullough, Caleb Hall, Morgan Cuterini, Ben Cole, Amber Grayson, and Roy DeBerry. So, Miss Ginny, let's start with your name and date of birth.
Okay, my full name is Catherine Virginia Kilgore, and my nickname is Ginny. That's what, if you don't call me Ginny, I'll think you're mad at me.
Where were you born?
Vincennes, Indiana.
How long you been here in Oxford?
I've been in Oxford since I came here to college in 1965.
So what was your life like growing up?
I grew up in a small town in Indiana that was a little bigger than Oxford, but not as big as Tupelo. So it was a little farming town, and it was a community of mostly farmers. It was there were not many African Americans in town. It was kind of just all one group of people.
What events or people in your life influenced your decision to attend law school?
I would say my mother was one of the people that influenced me to come to law school, just because I witnessed the problems that she had in the workforce when I was in high school after my father passed away, and there was a lot of employment discrimination against women at the time. There were lots of difficulties as a single parent that she had, and I think that was part of the push to go to law school. I had a professor, I was an English major, who was Evans Harrington, and he was an influence in my life at that time. At the time before I came to law school, I had thought of continuing on in English, and at the time, part of the reason I didn't do that is because there weren't any jobs available. And Evans thought that person ought to do the thing that would, they could be the most proud of, that they could accomplish, and to shoot for that. And so that's, I think, another reason I attended after I thought it through.
How did you find Northeast Mississippi Rural Legal Services?
I didn't really even know about North Mississippi Rural Legal Services until I got out of law school. I was not one of the people who was in the know about the legal services program here. Once I got out, I was practicing just sharing space over Leslie's drugstore in Oxford. And I was working with David Hill, a local lawyer, and we got involved in a couple of cases that we didn't know how to do. We were both right out of law school. One was an environmental law case. We were trying to stop the environmental impact statement hearing up in Yellow Creek nuclear plant in Tishomingo County, and we didn't know how to file a case in federal court. So somebody told us, well, go down to legal services and Alvin Chambliss will tell you how. So we did. We went down, and Alvin showed us the basic documents we had to file to get a temporary restraining order, and he encouraged us, and we filed it and we won. And we also started taking some employment discrimination cases involving African Americans in the area, and the people at Legal Services were involved in those cases, and so they helped us develop our case at that time. And also, I interviewed or I sat in on a class at the law school at that time that A.C. Wharton, who later was the mayor of Memphis, was teaching on employment discrimination. So I guess legal services was a teacher at that time for progressive private lawyers as well as for law students and interns, if you think about it.
So you said you started out with environmental cases. What was it like going from that to more of the discrimination cases?
Well, you know, we were doing a little bit of everything at that time. We just happened to be friends with the person who was the president or the head of the Mississippi Sierra Club at that time. And so he naturally came to us. He was in law school and asked us to go to court on that case. And so we took it on, even though it was the first time we'd even thought about an environmental problem. But at the same time, David Hill and I were litigating a few of the factory cases involving employment discrimination around here. That none of the jobs at that point past the entry level went to black workers. The lead men or the foremen, all of those were never advertised or anything, or there was never any way for anybody to know that a opening was coming about. So we developed the background to show how they were keeping the job market away from this group of people at that point. And people in the community found out that we were doing the cases. So some of the cases that didn't come to legal services, were coming to us as private lawyers because we were interested. And I got interested in that issue because of the problems my mother had when we were growing up.
So would you say you could kind of relate to some of the cases you took on?
Could you repeat it?
Like, would you say you could kind of relate to some of the clients you had and the cases that you took on?
Yes, I could very much. My mother was a thinker, and in high school we would sit around the kitchen table and talk about what was going on. And the things that were in the press then were like the sit-ins in the South. I was still in Indiana, and the Freedom Riders. And I was just like 12 or 13 years old, and we would see it on the news, and we'd sit around and talk about it. And then when she was going through some of the same kinds of things as a woman in the workforce, all of that kind of influenced my wanting to help people in those situations.
So what were some of the most important cases to you took on while working here?
Here at Legal Services, I worked some on the college desegregation case, the Ayers case. I was not one of the main litigators, but I did some of the background work and helped Alvin Chambliss with some of the development of the case involving the Mississippi State getting the land grant away from Alcorn at some point in the state history. Some of the other aspects of that case, I think that case was very important. I developed as a administrative law unit director. At one point I was in charge of all the Social Security and other administrative cases, and one particular case involved during the Reagan years. The Social Security Administration decided they had too many people on the rolls, so they just started cutting them off without a showing that the people had gotten better. They were still disabled. And I ended up with a whole bunch of cases in federal court at that point, and that was happening all over the country. Eventually, the load in the federal court became so heavy that, not my particular case, but all over the country, that there was a nationwide class action decision that Social Security had to stop cutting folks off a disability without finding that they had a medical improvement. So I was part of that. I also litigated some prisoners' rights cases back before legal services was prohibited later from handling prisoners' rights cases. But at the time I was handling those cases, the federal judge was appointing North Mississippi Rural Legal Services attorneys to handle those cases because they would be filed in federal court by what they call writ writers, people that, other inmates. And then the court would be left trying to handle a case with no lawyer. So our director at that time, Wilhelm Joseph, decided to work with the federal court and let us handle some of those cases. So we did triage, and we took on some of the cases that had issues that we could litigate for the prisoners. And they were things like prisoners being beaten and some illegal use of physical force against inmates and that kind of thing. Let's see. Also, I guess this was not a case, but I was in a group of legal services lawyers who developed the first movement to do a change of law in this state to address the problem of domestic violence. And in the early 1980s, we did that. We developed what I think we called it the Domestic Violence Coalition. And we met in Jackson. It was an informal group of poverty lawyers who got together. And ultimately, the state passed the first act, the Protection Against Domestic Abuse Act, after the efforts that we made. I think that was an important change in the law. And later I went into the area of elder law, and I think some of the nursing home cases that I was involved in were important. We represented people who were losing their benefits because their assets were being exploited by sometimes family members, and they would lose their Medicaid and be unable to keep their nursing home benefit because of these actions. And so we went into court and litigated. One case involved my work at the law school as a elder law clinic director, and we teamed with another law school clinic. This was when I was an elder law project director at Legal Services and also an adjunct at the law school. And we took on a case in which a beloved elderly teacher in a local town was told she had to leave the nursing home and she was unable to care for herself, and she was under a conservatorship, which is like a guardianship. And Medicaid had said, well, you gave away your assets, so you can't stay here. And so we found out that her granddaughter had been her conservator, and she had been taking her money illegally. But the state of Mississippi was blaming her grandmother for giving away her money and taking Medicaid benefits for her nursing home care. But our client was not aware of anything that was going on, so it wasn't anything that she had personally done. So we ended up taking the case into federal court in that case, and we won a settlement. We took the position that Medicaid, it wasn't enough for Medicaid to just say denied, denied, denied. That when you have a disabled person, that person has to be protected by the state, and the state was required to make sure she had an adequate Medicaid representative to keep her benefits in place. So it was part of the case was a disability rights issue. I think that was an important case.
When taking these cases on, did you yourself face any type of backlash, like from the public or from other people in the government in certain areas?
There's always been at least in the early years, a general backlash against lawyers for poor people or people who have don't have a strong voice in the community. And there's always a reason that the powers that be can find that these folks are too loud and boisterous. They're not handling this in the right way. There's, if Alvin Chambliss just wasn't so loud and obnoxious, everything would be all right. But the problem was that unless somebody did speak up and be a voice for those people who did not have a significant amount of power, then there would never be any change to protect their rights. And so there was a need for people to stand up and represent these folks. I remember one time talking to a lawyer somewhere on the street and was trying to make fun of legal services work in the Ayers case, the college desegregation case. And I just looked at him, I said, well, they won the case in the United States Supreme Court. So I don't think there's a whole lot else to say about it.
What was legal services' role for the Ayers case?
North Mississippi Rural Legal Services carried the Ayers case for, I think, about 20 years. I'm not sure. How many?
Is it 25?
25 years. And bore the expense and the effort it took to litigate that case. It was a huge undertaking. And it started, I guess, in the Greenville office with Ike Madison, and Alvin Chambliss became the lead attorney later when Ike Madison left and went to, I think, Atlanta. And Alvin carried the case as lead counsel after that for many years, I guess until about 85, was it? 95. Yeah, 95. And at that point, the Legal Services Corporation had decided to limit local programs like this from doing class action lawsuits to help a whole group of people with the problem they were having, and limited this program and all the other legal services to just taking the cases on one-on-one after that. So after that, we were not able to finish the Ayers case. But by that point, all the major litigation pretty much had been done. So we carried the load and carried it successfully to make sure the funding was adequate for all the universities in the state. I think it was a very important effort on our part.
So focusing on that then, what would you say are some of the positive aspects that legal services have maybe provided for the state and some of the cases they've taken on like that?
I think in about 1981, there was an article in the New Yorker magazine that talked about how the basic grants that were given to the legal services programs helped to insulate them from the problems that they would have as independent lawyers for poor people in the local communities that were pushing back against people having access to justice. And that was the beauty of the Legal Services Corporation grants, such as the one this program got. So I think it allowed the people who worked here to have an independent voice, to not always be worrying about what the local judge is going to think or what the Bar Association was opinion of everything would be. It gave independence to the attorneys to do what they're supposed to do under the rules of professional conduct, which is keep the interests of their client foremost in their mind and fight as hard as they could for those people. And people in the beginning, I hope that we hear from some of the people who were the original social workers and paralegals in this program. They went out into the community and told people that there were lawyers who would help them with their problems. And these were folks sitting way out in the county. People didn't have the access to communication that people your age do. They didn't have a way to get to town a lot of times, and they were dependent on the local country store and to give them credit. And if they spoke out, they might lose their access to even get the food they needed. They were living out from town and didn't have the resources to go in very often. People lost their jobs. One of my board chairmen at Legal Services lost his job as a teacher when he went to register to vote. So in the early years, we represented people in voting rights cases. They're just a basic right to have your grievances heard, to go to access the basic services everybody else did, to get a job. When I first started at Legal Services, I had worked as a private lawyer. There were no secretaries or attorneys in law offices that were African American in Oxford. There was nobody in the courthouse who was black. Not any of the tax assessor, the Chancery Court, the sheriff's office, the police. There was nobody anywhere. There were not jobs available in the banks, no tellers, nobody. So some of the first cases we took were employment discrimination cases and public accommodations. I remember at one point we had to make room for some things at the office, and we had to destroy some old files. We had a case involving integrating the Greenwood swimming pool, just some basic things that you would not even think this day and time about. We handled those prison cases, brought the light of day into a really corrupt prison here in Mississippi, the Parchman prison. It had a lot of brutality. You take those cases to court, whether you win or lose, you bring the light of day in, and people have to see what's going on. We help bring about the domestic violence movement against protecting women and some men from domestic violence. We brought cases in the area of children's rights and in the area of education law. Children who were being dismissed from school for offenses that white children were not dismissed for. So they were just really the whole area of civil law. We were not, Legal Services was never set up to be a public defender, so we were on the civil side, but all the other cases I think were instrumental in giving people a voice. And I think it continues in a different way now. We have second and third generations of people here now doing things. My successor at the Elder Law Project is one of the areas where people are very frail and need a voice now are the elderly and the disabled. And they have a very active elder law project here. And this program has existed for more than 50 years. And we've had, I'm not disparaging the effect that the Mississippi Center for Justice has had, but there have been very strong cases they've brought. But we've been here, we have, as Minnie Howard and William Faulkner says, we have prevailed. We have been here. We haven't gone away. We're still a voice for those people who don't have a way to get access to justice because of their poverty or because of their frailty sometimes. If the one call you have the energy to make, even if you have money and property, but you're elderly and your family's abusing you or mistreating you, if you've heard about the Elder Law Project and get that call through, that might save your life. And so that's why some of these projects are, such as the one for the elderly, is the focus is on the frailty and the isolation that people have sometimes, and we go to them. They're the people who aren't strong enough to call the call center usually. We find out about their case from social worker or a home health worker, and who are first responders for the elderly. And they may find out about a situation that we can help with as lawyers. And so that is still ongoing and a very strong effort. We still have a strong domestic violence unit here. We have housing experts at legal services, and we have the general experts such as Minnie Howard, who can handle just about any case that walks in the door for the poor and the elderly. So I think just the fact that we have been a part of this community for so long, have been a strong voice for those people who don't have access to justice, and the fact that we are continuing to fight to stay here for those folks. We got Ben fighting for us over there, dealing with all these different grants and keeping everything going. We've got the low-income taxpayer folks. We've got strong people out in the community, and then now we have the support of the access to justice people in the state and in the nation, and we're still having to fight these battles, and I think we're still the best organization to do that.
So touching back when you said that when taking on some of these cases, it seems like that sometimes people go through the hardships because they did that. And you said like a friend of yours that lost that person's job because they took on the cases. Do you feel that you were at risk of facing any of those troubles?
There were times when I went to court that I believe I was treated, in a different way than private lawyers. I remember Grady Tollison one time. He was later the president of the Bar Association. Asked me a question about that. It was more like a jibe, I guess. You get a rise out of me. I said, well, would judges ever treat you with disrespect? And I said, if you really look at it, who they're treating with disrespect is my clients. They don't like poor people to have a voice or have attorneys. It's not as personal to me as it is to. It goes to their situation, and some folks through the years did not think that poor people ought to have attorneys, and I think it took something of an independent cadre of lawyers such as that North Mississippi Rural Legal Services that didn't have to be so concerned about placating the judge's point of view, to be able to stand up for their client and not worry about their job, because they had an organization behind them that would support them in that effort and support their client.
So when facing those types of discriminations, would you say that affected how you practice law in any way? Did it maybe drive you to go for it harder, or did it make you want to cut back sometimes, or?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Like, were there some cases that you thought that maybe that discrimination being present was affecting how you had to handle the case in court? Did you feel that?
I think as long as we did a good job as attorneys practicing law, that we didn't necessarily have to take a different approach in that way, if I'm understanding your question correctly. There were times after we litigated an issue pretty strongly in court that we wouldn't have to litigate it again, because people in the community realized that if they went and got legal services, that there was going to be trouble. So I think sometimes I heard Alvin Chambliss say one time that after he had gone through fighting a case pretty hard, next time he went up to that area, he just had to tell him, don't do that. and you know, whatever the mistreatment that was occurring to people in the area would stop. And so I think the fact that you litigated something really in a strong way sometimes would help a lot more people later, because they knew we would be coming if they did it again.
Was there a specific case you took that sticks out to you the most?
There were lots of cases that that I was proud of, that I litigated. I think some of those nursing home cases that I had in the later years, I think they were pretty important. I think the Ayers case was a very important case. Some of the prisoners' rights cases I believe were important because of the fact that we, as I said, we did bring the light of day into a dark situation there at the prison. Just every day there were always people who their individual problems were extremely important to them. And I think just one after another, being able to help each one of them was the thing that was most important to me with their problem, which was the biggest thing in the world to them.
What are some of the most notable changes you've noticed with legal services here since your time in practice then to now?
I think every time we were successful in an area of law, it seemed that Congress would take that out of our jurisdiction. The integration of the schools, but you know, they did it too late. We'd already done it. And the voting rights cases, once we were told to get out, then we had already educated people, lawyers who were willing to carry the load in the private bar then. So legal services helped to forward what happened even in the areas that we were not allowed to do anymore, because we train the lawyers who went on to do it after Congress took the jurisdiction away from us. And that was something I don't think they ever counted on.
How would you say, like, your success in taking on, like, the voter registration cases and the integration cases, how do you feel that shaped life in Mississippi and across the country today?
Well, I think that the area here would have been probably subject to, I mean, it's speculation, but I think there would have been a lot more violence in this area if people had not gotten access to justice. I think the fact that we had, I think that the light that Dean Morse brought to the law school and the people who came from Yale University, and then them bringing the legal services grant to the state, helped connect the community and the law school and the community and the law back together, or together for the first time really in this area since Reconstruction. And it probably saved the area because, and it wasn't done just by the lawyers. The lawyers did it because the people stood up. People like Skip Robinson and Mildred Quarles and Mary Gordon and all the people out in the community who came forward and used the tool of the legal services to get access to justice. And if the law school had stayed on the side of the apartheid folks who were in charge of Mississippi at the time, it would have been a dead institution. There wouldn't have been any real purpose for a publicly funded law school in this state because the law wouldn't have meant anything. If the bar, if the legal services hadn't been here, and if the courts hadn't, we had some progressive federal judges at the time, and if they had not, and we had some progressive state court judges, and if they had not followed the rule of law and allowed access to justice the way they did, then this area, there would have been almost half the state would have been shut out of the legal system. And when people don't have access to a remedy, to legal remedies, then they take it out some other way in the streets. That was the reason the Lyndon Johnson Right Society program developed the legal services, because to keep people from, we did have rioting in the streets in the 60s and cities burning, and this was a way to give people another way to go, give them the access to justice, to make the system work really almost totally for the first time in this area. I think it was a huge accomplishment, and legal services didn't do it by itself. The community stood up, and they made it work. And the connection of the legal services to the community made the difference. But there are people who here like Ben Cole and Minnie Howard and Ruby White and the others here who day after day made it real, and it worked. To me, it's a very positive thing because we're going through some things now where people are forgetting that we're one country, I think, and we may have it all to do again, but we have made a good model here for people to see how to get it done.
So you feel that legal services has definitely left a legacy?
I do.
Do you think it's still continuing on through the state?
I think it has, and I think that it will continue on. And I hope that there's a way that we can get the word out to make it clear to everyone what we've done and what we can do in the future.